Hi, and welcome to Bear Creek's version of Amazing Grace. This is Brooke McBride. I'm the pastor here, and I want to welcome you to this class. This is the first of about a 5 or 6, maybe even a 7-part series on what it means to be United Methodist. But to be honest with you, it's probably Pastor Brooke's take on what it means to be United Methodist. One of the things the United Methodist Church has always held very firmly as the first and foremost thing that we respect and hold dearly is the grace of God. And by the grace of God, I mean the unconditional love that God has for us, that no matter what, at the very base of who we are loved by God. Yes, we are judged. We are judged, forgiven, and loved by God. That's at the very heart of what it means to be United Methodist. When I was a pastor in South Dakota, one of the first churches I served was the Geddes United Methodist Church, very grace-filled church. But when I first got there, they were going to do a vacation Bible school there. And they wanted to start at the beginning with their kids. And so they decided that they were going to give each child a piece of paper, just pure white, and then give them a black crayon. And they were going to have their kids just color those white spaces all in with this darkness. And then they were going to say, this is who we are as human beings. We are sinners. We are colored in darkness and mistakes. And the only salvation we have in this world is Jesus Christ. I remember when they were telling me how they were going to start Vacation Bible School, they said, this is where it starts. I mean, this is Adam and Eve, the story of the fall. And I remember thinking to myself, something is missing here. And so I thought about it for a while, and I pulled in the leadership, and I said, we're missing something. This isn't the beginning of the story. If you really look at the beginning of Genesis, the first part of this beginning is that we are good, that God has taken and created out of the darkness and out of the disorder and chaos of this world, order and light. And when God created us, God said, we are good. That's the beginning of this story. In a way, as United Methodists, when we talk about God's grace, that's what we're trying to say to the world, that it starts with goodness. Our relationship with God starts with this beautiful gift that God has given each and every one of us and placed in each and every one of us, this gift of God's amazing grace. In the United Methodist Church, we like to use 3 terms for grace. We just don't have one. We use a term called prevenient grace, a grace that goes before us. And we use a second term we call justifying grace. This is when we accept God's grace in our lives, God puts us in right relationship with each other and with God. And third, we like to use a term called sanctifying grace. We don't believe that our relationship with God is ended when we make that decision to accept Jesus into our life. We believe we're constantly in the process of turning more and more of ourselves over to God's grace so that God can perfect us in love. We are perfected in love. And this is a lifelong process. It's not a one-time moment, but something we are constantly working on. Not trying to perfect ourselves, but turning ourselves over, giving ourselves over to God so that God's grace and love can perfect us. We are perfected in love. One way we might want to look at this understanding of God's grace is to think of God's grace as a house. And on that house, there's a beautiful front porch. There is a wide open double doors, which we are always able to open if we want to, and a beautiful living room, and then a kitchen where we're able to serve others and make food for others and give life to others. In that picture of the porch, the living room, and the kitchen, the porch is God's prevenient grace, that grace that goes before us. When I was a kid, growing up, I had no clue all the things that my mom and dad did for me. But when I grew up, and when I became a parent myself, and I changed that first diaper and that second diaper and that 49th diaper, and I stayed up all night trying to help my child who was sick, I began to understand and appreciate all that my parents had done for me, the depths of their love and the breadth of their love. And in a way, that's what the porch is. We play on that porch, we have fun on that porch, but at some point, we began to realize the gift of this house, the gift of the giver of this house. And we not only notice the grace, but we accept it into our hearts that we are truly loved. And that decision is we want to walk in to the house. We want to get into the living room. We open that door and walk through into the living room and begin the process of being made over by God's love and grace in Jesus Christ. That movement, moving from the porch where we begin to see it and into the living room where we begin to accept God's grace, that is sanctifying grace. That's the moment, justifying grace. That's the moment we are justified. We are made right in God. The living room is where we're put in right relationship. As a pastor, I often come into the sanctuary and notice that the chairs are not justified. They're not in right relationship. So I have people help me put the chairs in right relationship. Justification, another way to look at it is when you think about your word processor, your computer, and you open up Word, and there's a justification tab. You can justify left, right, or in the middle, center. And that means these tabs place all these letters in right relationship with each other. In accepting Jesus Christ into our lives and allowing God's love to work in our lives, we begin to become in right relationship with each other and in right relationship with God. But we're not done. This is one of the things that John Wesley was kind of passionate about. He got tired of people talking about the moment they accept Jesus Christ in their lives. And it seemed like for him that their growth process stopped there. You know, they had a shallow understanding of faith, that they had this one moment and then it was like done. They didn't have to grow anymore. They didn't want to grow anymore. And he felt like that wasn't what it was all about. He felt like this understanding of God's grace was something you lived into your entire life. It was a process that started and continued to grow and grow and grow as you gave more and more of your life over to God, more and more of your heart, more and more of your darkness and your shadows over to God. You grew into something more. And that's where the kitchen comes into it. It's not just about accepting God's love, but it's becoming a part of God's team, entering the kitchen and being a part of serving others. It's in our service that we began to realize what really the Christian faith is all about. And so it's in the kitchen is where we're really perfected in love. It's where when we serve others, we begin to realize that our selfishness is more than we think, and to give up that selfishness and serve others is a part of the learning process. And the more we turn over in that kitchen, in the work of loving others and doing social justice out in the world and compassionate giving to others of our time and our talents, we learn what it truly is to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. In a lot of ways, the kitchen is where that discipling really is expanded and where we grow in that understanding. So that is the United Methodist understanding of grace. So as we continue on, I want to just share with you how important this understanding of grace is. It's at the very foundation of what it means to be a United Methodist. So one of the things I want to encourage you to do is to take some time this week to think about some of the moments of grace in your life. Think about that porch, the people who've gone before you, not just personally, but kind of as a society, who are some of the people that have gone before us to pave the way, to make this world a better place for you and for me. And sometimes when we think about our moments where we've walked into the door, there's a North Star. You know, there's this one moment that we see, and we keep turning it and telling the story over and over again. But my understanding of that is the North Star, when we understand that we've accepted Jesus Christ in that one moment, other stars of the constellation began to form and shape. It's not just one moment, but a constellation of moments that has made us turn and helped us turn to God's grace. And so we have the North Star maybe, but as you think and contemplate this week, I would like you to think of your life as a constellation of grace-filled moments. And I want you to write some of those down and draw those out and begin to tell that story, not just with the one North Star story, but the whole constellation. And that constellation for me just continues to grow. But one of the key moments in my life where I really go back to understand God's grace is when I was a little boy. I was in 3rd or 4th grade, and I used to have a cedar tree in the back of our house in White Lake, South Dakota, that I used to climb up and hide up there and play up there in the cedar tree, and used to bring friends in there, and we'd talk up there in that cedar tree. One of my friends was Lori, and in 4th grade, we climbed up that cedar tree in a snowstorm, just like we have just been having here in Seattle. We've had a big snowstorm. And we climbed up into the tree, and we just had one of these God-filled moments. The birds were hiding from the snowstorm. We were up there getting out of the wind and the snow, and we were just 2 or 3 feet from some of these birds. And Lori and I, we just had that special moment. But as we were talking, there was something about the safety of that place where Lori just reached up to her hair, and she took her hair off. And she shared with me that she had leukemia. Oh, she started crying, and I didn't know what to do. I do remember holding her hand and praying to God to be with her in that moment. Didn't really know what to say, but we prayed. And I told Lori I would be there for her. I was her friend. That spring, Lori passed away. It was the first encounter I had had with death in my life. And I remember Mom and Dad arguing with me whether I was to go to the funeral or not. I wanted to go. And so I did. I sat with Mom and Dad. And there weren't many of my friends there, really. I think there was one other. Parents allowed her to go. And after that funeral, I didn't know what to do with myself. I just felt so alone, and I thought of that cedar tree and the moments Lori and I had had there. And so after the funeral, and when I went home, I climbed that tree, and I was hoping for hope. I was hoping for grace. I was hoping for a safe place there. But as all I felt was more and more alone. And it began to overwhelm me, and just about the time it about shaken my foundation, I heard a noise down below, and I looked down, and there was my mom climbing up that tree to be with me. Grace, God's grace was coming up to be with me in my loneliest moment. And as soon as she placed her hand on my shoulder, I felt the power of the Holy Spirit warm my heart, and I knew I was not alone. And I knew there was a love that was greater than me and greater than death that would help me through this. That's one of my moments of grace, and without that moment, I don't know who I'd be, because with that I've understood God as a God who climbs up to be there with us in our pain. It's a moment of grace. I know you've had moments like that, and I'd like you to take some time this week to form and shape and put that constellation of grace together. We'll talk more about sin. We'll talk more about the Bible. We'll talk more about God's grace. But I'd like to stop here, and I hope you'll take some time to visit with me over Facebook. Thanks. Bye.